Welcome back to Behind the Educator's Lens, where we challenge assumptions and dig deep into what's working and what's not in education with today's leading voices. Today's guest is Mitchell Zuvela. Did I say that correct?
You were really good. Yeah.
Okay, even with the accent, it's fine.
No, it's great.
So I met Mitch overseas in China at Wuhan Maple Leaf International School. How many years ago was that now?
It was over 15 years ago, so it seems like a lifetime, but it really wasn't that long.
Do you still remember how to sing the anthem?
That's a good question. Actually, I think I sang it with Bryn when I saw him this summer, but I think we need our joint powers to make it work.
Yeah. I think it's quite a complicated tune, but sometimes it comes out after a late night of beverages.
Why not?
So Mitchell, or do you prefer Mitch?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, you're good either way. Flexible Guy is an instructional designer at LaunchPoint Learning. Is this still true?
Yes.
Known for tailored learning solutions and sharp instructional design frameworks, based in Cranbrook, BC, with a passion for disrupting outdated models. Today's topic is the holes in math instruction that are letting teachers and students down. We're not just talking about curriculum gaps, we're talking about systemic blind spots, broken transitions, and myths that need busting. Welcome, Mitch.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you, especially somebody who goes way back. But we're going to let everybody else get to know you with my favorite game, This or That. You can make a choice between two. You can give me an explanation or you can just blast through whatever you want.
Sure.
All right. Solo hike or team sport?
Team sport.
You afraid of the bears?
Well, I hike all the time, but
you do?
On my own, it's just a lot of stepping.
No chatting.
That's right.
Fixing something with your hands or figuring it out with your mind?
I like using my hands, but my mind rarely lets me down, so I'll go with that.
Yeah, that's the one I'd pick too. If I had like an IKEA piece of furniture to build, I swear I could build it faster in my mind than I could with a manual.
That's true.
Early riser or night owl?
Night owl.
You don't like the morning?
You know what? Just staying up late, you get that second kind of gear going and you can get so much done. No kids. It's just locked and loaded.
Yeah, parent life, man. That's for sure. You got to keep the night going. Okay, taking the lead or backing up the crew?
Taking the lead.
Shocker. Road trip with a buddy or a quiet weekend at home?
Road trip.
Me too. All right, and the final one. Do you know this question on my podcast yet?
Remind me.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Well, yes. This is tough because I was really into Star Trek and then Star Wars has been going on, but I just went to Vulcan and I was at Volcon. And so that's reignited my love of Vulcans. So Star Trek.
Did you rock a costume when you went to Volcon?
You know what? I didn't know it was Volcon that weekend. And so I was actually boating and it just happened to be Volcon. So I had to go check it out.
Yeah. When in Volcon.
When in Vulcan, you go to Volcon.
That's some good content right there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for participating in this week's This or That. It's always a lot of fun. So to dive in, I have a few questions that I'm really hoping we can get going on today. Question one that I have for you is, what is the most damaging blind spot in today's math instruction and why are we still ignoring it?
Great question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this actually during COVID, because I had time to reflect on what was going on with my students and just why was their struggles in areas that seemed so clear to me. What I noticed is that in looking at all the material that I had gathered from textbooks and websites and different resources, the way that math had shifted seems to be delivering it as more of a science. It's applied math. And so there's kind of two ways of looking at math. And if you look at kind of university math, it's very pure math. You're looking at numbers without units. You're looking at proofs. You're looking at theorems. It's very clean. And when you build textbooks, that's where they started from. But the reality is we've shifted wholly in BC to applied math. And with applied math, there needs to be an understanding, a transformation of your framework where units become a really important important part of that. And I've spent some time actually working for Pearson and editing textbooks and their most recent publication, the Mathology that they put out, and just noticing the disconnect. And they're kind of caught in this middle zone where they're not really putting out good applied math, but they're not really focused on pure math. And we're kind of caught in this limbo. And teachers are unsure right now of what type of math they're teaching. And that's kind of creating this kind of place where we don't have a lot of direction. I like to kind of think of it, the upside down in Stranger Things. Like we're kind of caught in these two worlds where we don't know where to go. And that's kind of where I've thought about where we need to shift. And talking with a lot of people, we're kind of caught in math as we knew it. And a lot of ways in university, we weren't really opened up to framing math in certain ways. It was a lot of how do we deliver it, but not really getting down to the roots of it. So I really think we have to start thinking about that as teachers of where we lie and how we make applied math more meaningful through logic. And the one thing that binds all math is logic. And I have to say, a lot of the logic has been stripped out to algorithms or, fun math that involves real life. And that's all great. But if we can't base math on logic, then we're missing its most fundamental feature. And that's what I see these days. And going back to our time in China, I was able to gather a lot from the students there because I went in there being the teacher. I was actually the student in a lot of ways because the kids had such a strong understanding of pure math concepts. And I came in thinking, and it was funny, they called me the wizard because I was teaching them with these algorithms or tricks. I'm like, you guys don't know how to do this math. You didn't use the trick. You didn't use the, keep, change, flip trick. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, this is magic that you're teaching us. There's like a math theory that we use that applies to this. And it took me a step longer, but I understand the theory behind this and I can use it in every situation. Whereas keep, change, flip was just a trick. It was just a trick that I would give them to help them get to the solution. And they were helping me walk backwards and understand the theory behind. And that was really sobering in a way because teachers like to come in thinking that they have all the answers, but really I needed to ask more questions myself. So that was really kind of the starting point of my journey of reflecting on our current math trajectory.
That's one of those moments in education that sets you off on your own personal trajectory. And I think those kids in that moment, for you to be so brave to be like, hey, I actually thought I was going to come in and show you how to, and then that's all I learned in high school math as well. And I had a tutor that also taught me the tricks and what you do to one side, you do to the other. And I was like, okay, just got to remember these steps. But the bravery that you took to be like, wow, actually you can take the lead here and you can show me the roots of why we even got to this trick. That's something that I think has set you to where you are today, right?
Absolutely. It's tough though, because you really have to question what we've been taught in the past, and we have to question the processes, and are these processes actually creating cognitive anchors, or are they just crutches to get us through? And when I looked at the students that I was teaching in China, they understood math at a different level where they could see anything and it didn't matter. They had a toolbox of tools that they could apply in that situation. I know that's our goal in Western math, but the algorithms are not that. And what we really have to do is kind of take a moment to reflect into how are we going to bring that logic back so that the kids are going to see stuff and feel confident moving forward because they have those tools, that basic, Swiss Army knife that they can apply in every situation. And it takes a bit longer to get the solutions. But when you have that Swiss Army knife, you're not wondering what tool to pull out of that toolbox. When you have 100 tools in that toolbox, it's a challenge just figuring out what tool you got to use, right? When you got a Swiss Army knife that does everything, it really creates that ease. And so that's where I think a really important transition that teachers are going to need to make in the future are how do we kind of take a step back? And that's kind of where I moved to over the last few years. It's been a transition for sure.
I like that concept of the Swiss Army knife of mathematics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll share it with you after the show, but I actually created one sheet and I laminated it, and it has all of the tools. So it's basically a Swiss Army knife that you could do everything in grade 7, 8, and 9 math. And so it didn't matter what. If the kids were struggling, I would just hand them that laminated sheet and I would say, explore it. Sit there, explore, look to see what tool might fit, and look at the titles, look at the units. And that's the key thing, is letting the kids explore with tools and allowing them to feel comfortable with some math theorems that can be applied. Again, we sometimes wonder, can we give kids their textbook or supports? These kids are 10, 12, 13, 14 years old. Their brains are functioning at a different level than us adults, and sometimes it's hard to go back into their brain. And sometimes just having something organized in front of them will help give them that one step forward.
Yeah, I love tools. I would have loved some tools when I was learning, because I always found that I was only taught, through numbers, and there was never any physical representation. So, what is your favorite tool that you have out there to help kids to visualize and conceptualize math?
So I cannot say enough about Cuisinere rods. So I brought, can we see them? They're there. Cuisinere rods are unbelievable because they are a tool that can be used from grade 1 up until grade 8 or 9. And there's a really important part of Cuisinere rods that I have to say is different than a lot of the different tools we use, is that they create a unit, and so it's unitizing. And so you can't physically see 7 or 8 individual blocks. And because that's really important to conceptualize, that this is no longer 7 ones. This is a unit of 7. And so the idea that this is a complete object, but it has a value that's different than the object it is. Like when you look at this, kids will say, well, what's the value of this? It's 1. But in reality, it's any value we want to assign, right? If we think about the quantity of this object is 1, but the value of it can be anything we want. And that's where multiplication and division come in, that disconnect between there being 2 ways of looking at an object, its value versus its quantity. And so that's where Cuisinere rods are really cool, because we can start visualizing things. We can see how things add together, and we can see how multiplication is by, repeat addition, but it's by adding units or counting by the same type of unit every time. And that's where early math is really important. I talk to kindergarten and grade 1 teachers who don't know why they do counting in kindergarten and grade 1, counting by 1s and 2s. And they think it's become familiar with numbers. And it is, but it's actually to build multiplicative thinking. Because if you can count by 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s, you can build that multiplicative thinking, which is really important.
Yeah. How would you use that blue Cuisinere rod in, say, a grade 3 class? What would you do to make it have some type of mathematical content or knowledge to it?
Well, funny that you say. Summer math school with my kids. My daughter's going into grade 2, and I had taught my son how to use the Cuisinere rods. And so I was going to do some lessons, and my son's like, Dad, I'm going to take over today.
Yes,
like, okay.
That's so good.
So he's going into grade 5. And it was really cool to see. So he wanted to talk about multiplication and division. First thing he did was he gave my daughter a number. So he said, okay, let's think of 16. And so my daughter took out a 10 rod and a 6 rod and placed them on the table. And she could see that because a 10 is an orange. The 6 was whatever color it is. And she could see 16 in the 10s and 1s, which made sense. And then we talked about dividing. And he's like, let's divide by 4. So she then realized that she could only use the 4 length. And so she went and pulled a bunch of Cuisinere rods, and then she lined them up. And she noticed that 4 Cuisinere rods that had a value of 4 would fit perfectly in the same amount of space as the one that was the orange and the 6 to make 16. And so at that point, my son walked her through, if you have 16 and you divide it by 4, that means you're counting by 4s. And then how many rods are you going to need to have to count by 4s to get to 16? And she said 4. And so it was this walkthrough. And then the cool part is that I always like to talk about real mathematicians never guess at an answer. They always check their answer. And he's like, okay, so now we got to go the other way. So he told her the opposite of division is multiplication. And so he walked her through, all right, if we have 4 of these rods that have a value of 4, let's add them up and see if they equal 16. And that proved her right. And she was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And so 16 is a 10 and a 6, but it also can be thought of as 4 rods that have a value of 4. And that's where the idea of quantity and value come into play. And that's what multiplication is. If you think about multiplication, you're always multiplying a quantity by a unit value. And so when they think of it in that way, as each rod is its own unit value, and I'm always going to have to use the same rod in multiplication, it helps create that consistency and that understanding of unitizing and what multiplication is. And so they just practiced that for a bit, and it was cool to watch. And my daughter, who's in grade 2, they don't have to do division at that level to that extent. He was going up to 81 and 72. She was getting it. Now, she wasn't memorizing in her head, but conceptually, she was getting it way better than anyone could understand from just understanding that 16 divided by 4 was 4. She was understanding the conceptual idea that division is breaking things down into quantity and units. And so it was good to see. And that's where I would suggest, kids in middle school or elementary school, intermediate, is just using the Cuisinere rods. We even talked about this with remainders, because what happens when you have 17? Well, that was an interesting topic that I had talked with them about the day before, is that a 5th rod wouldn't fit, but we can only count using that type of rod. We can only count by 4. So what would happen? Well, that's where we get into remainders. And so we talked about there's a remainder 1. But this is where we get a disconnect, where remainders are not actually a telling story, because if we're unitizing, a remainder of 1 is not actually the true story, right? Because the unit is at a 4. So it's actually a remainder of 1/4 of a unit. We talked about how it's actually 1/4 remainder, and how sometimes we say 1 to make it simple, but when we're only counting by 4s, it's actually 1/4. And he's like, okay, I see that now, because seeing it on paper is one thing, but seeing that if you can only count by 4s, it's going to go longer than what you want. And so you only want that extra 1/4 of a spot. And it really works well, because that ties into now mixed fractions and how mixed fractions relate to rational numbers. And it creates this more seamless connection to how fractions work, and that fractions are just division. Because that's another area we can talk about later, is fractions and division are sometimes lost in their connection.
Yeah, I'm blown away at your children. And also, I feel like they're really going to be challenging their teachers. They're going to be those students that you met by the time they get to high school. Isn't that such a full circle moment to watch your son do exactly what you as an adult kind of reflected on at the start of this episode? I just think that that's like a really beautiful moment.
Well, this year he was challenging his teacher, which was Anna Lee, my wife.
Oh, mommy was teaching her son. My goodness, how did she survive that?
But the reflection at the end of the year, he said, you know what, it was like having a spy in the class. However, my mom really challenged me in math this year.
Oh,
that was a good thing to hear.
She's also a smart cookie, so your kids are very lucky to have 2 teachers in the home and 1 at school, right? So instructional design is supposed to bridge gaps. Why do you think so many math programs still feel like patchwork?
Well, I think we're stuck in a spot where math hasn't really evolved in a really long time. When I look back at, as part of a book that I wrote on kind of the evolution of math, I kind of went back and read some research papers on how math was developed as a classroom subject, especially in industrial areas in England and North America. And a lot of the time, teachers had no training in math, and commerce was becoming big, factories, being able to understand how to use money. And so the huge focus was put on money, but also how to create algorithms to teach kids math and to help teachers execute it when they had no training. And it could be packaged in a beautiful little textbook. And so that's how math was designed. And we haven't really taken math, deconstructed it, and said, is this what's good? Because China's math system evolved in a totally different way. And so that's where we see this dichotomy, is kids in North America are really good at getting the answers. And talking with professors in post-secondary who I've been using this research for, my papers is when you get to creative thinking and thinking outside the box and using theorems and ideas, the North American kids really struggle. However, the kids from India and Asia who have that theory background and theorems, they're able to use that as, again, a Swiss Army knife to solve problems that don't fit inside the box. And when I look at North American programs, right now we're struggling with technology and AI, and there are so many different things that are pulling us in different directions. We really got to get down to the basics and the basic theories in math that bind us and are more logical. And so, again, like using Cuisinere rods, understanding the logic and how units relate is really important. And so we have to get out of this kind of idea that there's this blur, and I don't know if you've seen this, is between algebra and looking at rational numbers, and then how we want to relate that to the base 10 model, where those two worlds don't exist in the same sphere. They're two different worlds, and we force kids to really convert a fraction to a decimal before they even have a strong understanding of what a fraction is, or how fractions are division, or how it relates to rational numbers. And that just breaks them apart because we haven't really explored the full understanding. And then all of a sudden we're asking them to be a translator. That's really tough because the base 10 model, you are looking at logs and exponents and approaching zero. And so it's different than looking at rational numbers where, a decimal is not important. It's a general estimate of a number. And we really have to kind of slow down, I think, on some of these ideas. Making sure kids can convert from a fraction or a rational number to a decimal is actually really deep because they have to know both worlds pretty good. And we force it way too early. And there are just some areas like fractions. Our understanding of fractions is so fragile and so minute that we actually don't really prepare kids. And fraction has always been one of those totally misunderstood things. But there's so many areas that we have blind spots in, like you mentioned. And one of the most common ones that I mentioned is the counting when you teach it early at age. So you ask someone to count to 5, and what would they do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You ask someone to count down from 5. How would they count down? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mathematically, that creates a huge gap in understanding because when you count down from something, it's not inclusive. And so when we count up, we don't start from 0. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as we count down, we shouldn't include 5. It should be 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And that has huge implications on subtraction.
Can you tell me why we don't do that though? Why don't, I did this actually with my office and I tried to reproduce it and I was like, okay, you guys, you're going to count up and then you're going to count down. And then I was like, see? And they were like, see what?
I would blame New Year's Eve as the biggest culprit because when we count down from 10, we count on the big ball, 10, 9, 8. But the reality is when we count down from something, it's not inclusive of that number. So when I asked kids in grade 7 to subtract 14 minus 3, they would get their fingers out and they would go 14, 13, 12.
Oh,
and
then
to
they're
them,
wrong.
To them, that made visual sense because 3 spots is what I asked of them, but they had no clue that it wasn't inclusive of the first number. Because naturally they wanted to do it. But with 0, when they count up, they didn't do it. And it was just baffling all of a sudden. I had half my kids who couldn't subtract based off of that one issue because they always included the starting value. And it's those things that we really have to be cognizant of, teachers. And it's just one of those small things that we don't even realize. And I just realized I reflected of how many small errors I was making and just how many problems there were in the textbook in the way I was executing things that need to be rethought. And that's just one of them. And so that's one of the most basic things I just bring to teachers. If you remember anything today, if you wonder why kids aren't subtracting well, it's because when they're counting down, they're including the number it's from and not counting one down. And it's just those small things that do make a really big difference that kids get frustrated about and they think they're doing it. And that creates those reasons. I am not good at math. And we got to help them through that because those are some issues that come from just our teaching.
And then also, taking acknowledgement for it, that it's in the society. Of course you're making that mistake. So let's fix it.
And it's, speaking with textbook publishers and bringing these ideas to them, they loved it. But what's the proof? Have you done research studies? And how are we going to change 100 years of what textbooks have done, and they've done great things. But to flip the math industry on its head, I've looked at a lot of case examples, is not an easy task. So it's a huge mountain to climb.
Yeah. But starting with those small things, that's where we chip away, I think, at it, right? Like what can we do? We can spread that message, man.
Exactly. Talk to as many people as you can is important, and just explaining and just getting people to ask questions themselves. If they look back and reflect even on that one thing, they might go back and look at a few more things. But I think the big point that is going to be pivotal is our universities and our professors, and how are they going to evolve our teaching practices in these next 10, 20 years as AI and as math changes. It's a really interesting question to ask, and there's going to be a lot of change, or education is going to stick their feet in the ground and resist that change. I don't know if that's what's going to be best for kids. So I think we're at a pivotal time in education, but it's another conversation for another day.
We'll have to reschedule you back. So in terms of you're mentioning their different grades and different transitions, what grade transition do you think is the biggest instructional train wreck, and what would it take to fix them?
That's a great question. Different parts of the province have different times that students move, but typically grade 7 is the middle school transition. That's just tough for so many reasons. So that's a typical answer that I said at the beginning of my career, but after doing more analysis, I've always found grade 4 and 9. With our current curriculum, grade 9 is a huge shift because they start preparing for pure and applied math or workplace math. Kids don't know it, but they're actually pre-starting. And a lot of the kids in grade 9 math, who again are probably going to go into workplace, they're being forced to do a lot of pure math. And it's a struggle for a lot of them. There's not a great way of transitioning them even to the middle ground. So that's a tough spot. I've noticed grade 9, you see a lot of sinkers and a lot of swimmers, but also in grade 4, elementary math, you explore. And in grade 4, things become a little more real. You look at things a little more in-depthly. Your teachers are going to ask more of you. And so it's a pivotal point in which they need to come with some, I think, the word I use a lot is, we talk a lot about, if you're not literate, but if you're not numerate, you're enumerate. We have to make sure kids are numerate coming into grade 4. And if they're enumerate, that's a tough spot. And so do they understand about counting and how counting relates? And so I think that really key pivotal ground is working with teachers grade K to 3, because they're building those foundational blocks. And when I look back at what some of my most important cognitive anchors in math, a lot of them were in elementary school. Working with manipulatives. I remember using the 10 blocks, and there's a research study that shows math imprints, usually from 5 to 10 years old, is a really important math imprinting. And that's where a lot of their attitudes towards math happen, is in those 5 years. And so it's really important at those early stages that logic is being used, and there's a lot of really important progression. And I think some of the most important stuff, making math moments, and Cubed is a really good program that I've listened to, but they talk about the 8 components of counting. And as the foundational piece, it's one of the most important things I would bring to teachers in the schools to help them understand why counting is going to build those building blocks to someone who's numerate. And so, yeah, I find grade 4 and grade 9 especially to be important. So, yeah, they're pivotal points in the kid's career. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I love teaching grade 3, because I feel like right at that point I was able to catch a lot of them where they might have started to really struggle, and instead we were able to work together and dig in and try to clear up some of those math misconceptions that might have formed. Or my favorite was always taking math attitudes and turning them around. And I know you mentioned logic. I'm curious what you think about gameplay, because that's something that I like to introduce in the class, or games like crib or chess. Like, do those help kids build their mathematical minds as well?
Yeah, I think there's unstructured math play and then there's structured math play. And it's an important, again, that's a great question. Teachers understand the difference between the two. Unstructured is great for kids just to decompress and to use math in a way that they can enjoy, and those are important in the classroom. But they're not looking back and reflecting on what they're doing. They're just executing it. Those are signs of mastery. If you can use math properly in games, crib is counting. And so if they can count properly in a crib board, they're showing mastery in the skill, which is great. But if you look at how you flip the coin and math as a teaching mechanism, there's some more steps involved. And I reflected on how I have to be more conscious of the purpose of a game and
Right.
making that clear to the kid, because when the kids go into the game activity, if they're thinking of it as math game for fun, they shift. There's more socializing. So if we kind of create a precursor where this is math, this is a game for learning, and make the game small, effective, and with purpose and timed, where they're trying to accomplish something in a given amount of time, that helps them keep that direction. And it's not large amounts of knowledge they have to use. It's very specific so that you can get that feedback as a teacher, and then collecting that data. I wouldn't collect their crib scores at the end of a game, but I would want to collect a small game score that they did in the middle of my lesson.
Right.
Because that's, if I'm doing that activity and I'm not trying to gain feedback from it, how useful is it? Sometimes it is, but a lot of time taking that information back and using it is really helpful.
Yeah, and that's what we want to do as teachers, is find authentic assessment that we can use to help the kids grow further in whatever area they need to learn. I agree with that. Okay, friend, if you could blow up one myth that's holding math teachers back, what would it be, and what should replace it?
I've had some conversations where they've gotten pretty heated about fractions, and
Really?
I've enjoyed that, because it's not often that people get excited about math ideas, and that's great, because I think one of the biggest thing is talking with the people you work with and your coworkers in a professional manner. I like to say, it's arguing, but it's educational. You're trying to explain something so that they see your point of view, and you have to do it in a way that's effective and professional. But I like that banter, and I like just being able to talk with someone about that. And so what is a fraction? And so many people get caught up of fraction. We get caught by the definition of a denominator. And I actually went back and looked at some original definitions of what a denominator was when it was first described by the mathematician. And I had it written in my book. Off the top of my head, I forget his name, but the definition of a denominator is how many parts that make up the whole. And we think of the whole as one, but the original definition is how many parts that make up a whole unit. And that's really key to understand, is that when we think of a whole unit, again, with the Cuisinere rods, we can see this as a quantity of one, but a lot of time we get fixated that this actually also has a value of 7. And so when we think about a denominator, we actually need to think about it as the way that we're counting. So when we think of, what's 8 over 4? The denominator is 4, and that's telling us we're counting by units of 4. So if we count by units of 4, how many units are we going to need to get to 8? Well, we're going to need 2, and that's our answer. It's a quantity of 2 units of 4 make 8. And so I really think we need to better understand fractions and kind of break this myth that when we take a pizza and cut it into its pieces, we're focused on the whole pizza, when in reality, we need to focus on all the parts. And that's a shift. And when we think about how it relates to division, how it relates to rational numbers, it's way more consistent when you think about it in that way, and not just think about it as the parts that make up one. Because it's not one. One is its quantity, but its value can be anything. And when you get to algebra, it's a really huge leap. Kids struggle in unitizing and understanding how you factor out units in the denominator, because they have this understanding that it's always a whole. And the reality is that whole doesn't exist. So a whole is not one. A whole is a whole unit. And a whole unit can be any given number from any rational number. So it's been because a lot of people argue, well, a whole is always one. And so it's one of those myths that we have to understand, that fractions are just a number on a number line. The definition of a fraction is a fractional value is a number that falls between two whole values. And when we draw a picture of a fraction, we're actually showing division. We're actually showing execution, because an operator is acting on numbers. And when we draw a fraction, we're showing how the number is being operated on. And so it's important for us to understand how division makes a fraction. So I've been practicing with my kid. I just talk with him. If you have 8 candies and you divide it amongst 4 people, how much candies would each kid get? And he's like, 8/4. And I said, that's absolutely right. Each person gets 8/4 because 8 divided by 4 is a fraction 8/4. And I ask him, can we simplify that at all? Is 8/4 going to simplify into a whole number? And he thinks about it. Oh, well, if I count by 4s twice, that gives me 8. So yeah, 8/4 is 2. So if I split it up, everyone gets 2 candies. And so it's working them through that idea that we're not just taking a pizza and slicing up 8 ways and how many are you going to eat? It actually takes away from all the algebraic purpose to it to just something that we can rationalize in commerce. It's like, oh, you have a few quarters in your hand and you take 2 quarters away, how much money you have. It doesn't really relate to the algebra. And when you get to middle school and high school, you shift to this algebraic thinking. And I've seen it in so many kids, they're just lost. They're just like, there's a missing component. They don't get how now you can factor out, numbers better than 1. So
do we throw the pizza out?
Absolutely. There's nothing worse than the pizza. I would say the best way to think of it is with your Cuisinere rods and stacking them on top of each other. So like if you think of a fraction, what is, 9/10, I stack them on top. 10 is the bottom. And if I'm counting by tens and I have 9, you can see that I don't have a full unit, right?
Right.
And so seeing it visually stacked on top really helps instead of having it side by side. And so being able to work with fractions in that way, I think is really important, but them to understand that division is the starting point. And when we show a picture like this, I have 9, that's my numerator. 10 is the units I'm counting by. And when I do an operation, which is division, I'm acting on it. This is the result I'm going to get, which is 9/10. And we focus on kids, making them turn that into a decimal. That's the heart. Why would we do that when they're just learning the basics of rational numbers and fractions and division? Why are we switching to decimals when it's a totally different understanding in math? And that's, again, a huge problem, is that it's tough for kids. Like, it's 2 number systems.
Why then fractions and decimals became this topic that's converted back and forth? Because that is something you commonly see grade 4, 5, 6 is those grids. And I feel like I have nightmares of them where you have your fraction and then you had to convert it into a decimal. And for me, I just could never visualize those concepts together. And so I could do one, I could do the other, but doing them, why do you think that those are placed together?
Again, I think it had to do with commerce. And the idea is like, if you think about quarters and you have 4 quarters in your hand and you took a quarter away, it connects in that way because 4 quarters makes $1. So when we think about if we're relating to dollars, which was the main currency back then, dollars was an important way of looking at money. For them to think of as a whole as always being 1 made a ton of sense in commerce, because you could train kids to give change. You could train them in math with, having a business. And that's totally shifted. We need kids who understand algebra first, understand log scale second, and then take that model and then try to blend those 2 worlds when they understand both, not just forcing, a transition that they're not ready for. Like asking you to be a translator for Chinese to English or Mandarin to English right now, you'd be like, I could help with a few words, but it'd be lost on me, right?
I learned how to use the Translate app now. I wish that I had this back when we were in China. I never realized, again, until today, that commerce has such a large effect on the education that we've had as teachers, and then also the materials that we have and kind of the way that the entire system is built. But clearly we don't understand that it does come from this place of commerce, because now that you've explained that to me, when I'm looking at the curriculum, I would be looking for how do I move it more to a conceptual place and away from that bias of money or commerce or business.
And money is important because it's funny, if you think about our currency, it does have a lot of usage outside of thinking of dollars. Because if you think about, we have $5 bills, $10 bills, we have one object, but its value differs from its quantity. So that's where we get multiplication being really fun, because if you have 10 $5 bills, you have 10 objects, and each of them doesn't have a value of 1, right? you're going to
Yeah.
have a total value of 50. And that is a really important part of multiplication, but it's that idea that a whole is not just one. This whole bill is not a value of one. This whole bill has a value of 5. And making kids understand that quantity and value are two different parts of our world and multiplication, that's really important, because I would talk with kids. When we add, you can only add and subtract like things. You can add apples to apples. You can add, oranges to oranges, but they have to be like. When we're looking at multiplication, you're taking only one object and you're using it over and over again. And so you have to think of it as a little bit differently, because you're going to have quantity and you're going to have value. So there's going to be two different units that are going to be involved. So if you think about like meters per second, dollars per pound, anytime you see a mixed unit like that, right away you need to know that there's going to be multiplication and division, because you're combining two units. And so understanding that at an early age, that there's differences there and how you use addition, subtraction, multiplication, division is really important. And that's where the logic comes in. Again, it all comes down to logic.
So there's no way that I could trick your kids with the birthday trick that I normally do, is I put in a lot of $5 bills, because kids open the envelope and they're like, Auntie Robin, you gave me 5 fives. Yeah, dude. Gave me $25. But a 20 and a 5, and they're like, you only gave me 2 bills.
Absolutely. That's a great point. You're using the idea of quantity and value very effectively.
Well, your kids won't be stumped, but the rest of them will keep going for a little while. All right, well, we're going to move into our last segment of the evening. This has been fantastic. And I've got 2 myths that I've selected for you to try to bust for us today. 1, some students just aren't math people. What do you think about that?
So that's another really great topic to bring up, because that was one of the most difficult parts of being a teacher, was having parent-teacher interviews, sitting down with parents, the student, myself, and hoping to bring everyone on how we can work together as a team to make math a topic and a subject that we're all on the same page and want to get excited about. And the first thing I would hear from a lot of parents is, I was never good in math in school, so I don't see how my child could be. And right away, it just killed me inside, because it created that idea that there was a genetic deficiency inside that student, and that their genes were the reason why that they weren't good at math. And to be able to overcome that is really tough. And there was only been a few instances where I've been able to overcome that. That was a struggling point as a teacher that really kind of made me question how we're looking at math as a society, for sure. So it's definitely a myth. And when people say it's in their genes, it's a genetic deficiency, it's just making that myth much stronger. And I always tell parents and kids is, you fake it till you make it. And that's just as important in working with your kids in math. If you go down that path where you know information, but you're also willing to learn with them and search it out and prepare ahead of time and show that you're looking for the path as well and are positive towards it, that rubs off a lot on your children as well. And that's really key.
Yeah, not everybody's success might look different, but at least, being able to work with the teachers. And I think a lot of teachers are really caring people. And so they want to help you find success and help you through your challenges and what you're working through. And so having that mindset as a parent, sending your kid to school this September, making sure that they have that positive attitude in the back of their mind, and that you are the person that is helping them put it there too.
Yeah, I think there's this I think I've heard it, another professor talking about this, but this inherent math trauma in some family units. And it's intriguing where it comes from, because it really has an effect on generations of family members and how that gets passed on. And it's a fallacy. It's a myth. I think, like I mentioned earlier, if we go back to logic, I think there's a lot we can do with math, because when I looked at my daughter use those Cuisinere rods and my son, to them, it was logical all of a sudden. Like it didn't even require them to process. It just made sense. Like, okay. And they just started repeating it. And there was no guessing. There was no, the Cuisinere rods made it something that they could tangibly use. And I think if we go back to logic and math, we're going to really help our kids in the long run. So
Go back to logic and bring in all the manipulatives, especially the Cuisinere rods. I also really like the Run Racks. Do you like the Run Racks?
remind me, what are I'm so obsessed with Cuisinere rods.
And Rex are like really also good for skip counting. So they have 2 rows. They're just little tools, and they have 3 white circles on a bar and 3 red circles on a bar. Or I think I've seen them in different sizes too. And then so the child can move 2 whites over, and they can see 2, or they can move over in a unit of 3 and count by threes. So they can manipulate on this rod and start. It's for the little ones like K,
Yeah,
maybe 1, maybe.
I think
for
that's really
remedial.
good for those younger ages because they need to see those ones, but evolving to rods where you can't see 3 objects in it to know that's a unit of 3 helps in that transition to multiplication. And so I think, yeah, K1, they're just building that understanding, definitely a great starting point, and to help them with that counting because counting is so key.
So final thought, what is one actionable shift teachers can make tomorrow or next week to start closing the gaps in their classrooms?
I would say do something that is going to be difficult and awkward and maybe crack open a bottle of wine, sit with your thoughts, no cell phone, and just reflect on what you did as a student, reflect on what you're doing as a teacher, and think about the own gaps in your learning. What was there something that you missed? And think about, are you addressing that as a teacher now? And reflect on your own. I think we get caught up in so much stuff, and most of the kind of breakthroughs I've had have been late at night after some time thinking or socializing or just being at one with my thoughts, and actually just having a piece of lined paper and just scratching down my ideas on the paper and just looking at them and saying, how does this make sense and how doesn't it? What can I question about this, or how could this work better? And just reflecting. And it can be tough, it can be uncomfortable, but I think one of the most powerful statements one of my professors told me is the moment in which you feel uncomfortable in the learning process is when true learning occurs, because you don't know what the answer is, and you have to be vulnerable to figure out what's going to come next. And I think in schooling nowadays, kids are really comfortable because they're exposed to so much information. And when they reach those points where they feel uncomfortable and can't predict the next moment, they shut down. And that's where the anxiety comes in.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that's the moment where true learning is about to take place. And it's a big loss. And I think teachers could also reflect on that a bit too.
I love that. Thank you. Where can people find you if they want to bug you?
Sure, they can check out LaunchPoint Learning, and I develop instructional content and work consulting for publishing companies or ed tech or even business. And I'd love to hopefully one day be able to make some more impact in the education field with some of these big ideas in math, and circle back and talk to teachers again in the near future.
Well, I think that, like you said, now's the time. And I think that you have some really great ideas, like I said, that I've actually never considered or heard before, but makes so much sense. And I think just those little bits of wisdom that I can impart are going to help a lot of kids. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was good chatting again.
It was great. So listeners, I'm going to invite you to reflect as well. What's one math myth you've believed, and what will you do differently now? I cannot wait to share with you the guests that are up ahead this fall. Keep listening to Behind the Educator's Lens. Until next time.